And joining me now is the former three-term Manhattan District Attorney, Cyrus Vance. Cy, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Good morning, and thank you for having me back.
Donald Trump's campaign, as you have seen, is leaning into the idea of this untested legal theory behind the case that escalated state misdemeanors into state felonies based on, among other things, a violation of federal election law. Prosecutors, this is from Eli Honig, the former federal prosecutor. I'll put it up on the screen. He said prosecutors got their man for now, at least, but they also contorted the law in an unprecedented manner in their quest to snare their prey. You chose not to bring these charges against Donald Trump when you were DA. How much did this being an unprecedented legal novel theory weigh into your decision making?
Well, we did investigate the former president on a range of issues. I ultimately believed that our investigation was best focused on financial crimes. First, we had a lot of time spent lost during COVID, where our investigations were interrupted. We had to go to the Supreme Court twice to ultimately have the highest court in the country rule that the president's tax returns were not privileged and had to be turned over to investigators, and that it reaffirmed the constitutional principle that even a sitting president can be investigated for crimes that occurred before he was president. So we've looked at all the legal issues, Peter. We spent years, and I'm confident that we made the right choice for us at that time in pursuing the financial crimes investigation. As you know, it resulted in convictions.
If I can, let me ask you, though, when you were the Manhattan DA, as you said, you charged the Trump Organization, you charged the CFO, Chief Financial Officer, Alan Weisselberg, but you did not pursue charges against Donald Trump himself. How much did the fact that he was a sitting president, then former president, weigh into that decision?
Well, I think, of course, it weighs into the decision because of the significance of a decision to charge a sitting president. But ultimately, we did pursue those charges that we felt were appropriate and which were backed up by the evidence and which were significant. In the first indictment, it was systemic tax fraud and double bookkeeping in his company. And that's what we felt the charges should be. And that's where we unfortunately ran out of time at the end of my administration, and then D.A. Bragg took over. He redirected the efforts of the office.
Yeah, and to be clear, as you have said, that there was additional evidence that D.A. Bragg was able to collect. Donald Trump's attorney says they're going to appeal this verdict. Do you think the prosecution's case will withstand an appeal?
Well, certainly there will be strong appeals, and there are going to be issues that will be carefully considered by the appellate courts.
What's the best grounds for an appeal, Zy?
Well, I'm really not going to comment on something that I don't think is my place to comment on. But they've identified this issue about charges that are not necessarily identified, a choice between three charges, sort of Russian nesting doll theory. But I want to address that, if I can, Peter. That's not necessarily totally unusual in New York law. You commit burglary in New York, burglary of a dwelling, where you enter a person's home with intent to commit a crime therein. The jury is not required to find beyond a reasonable doubt what that crime is.
Yeah.
But so my point is that in other areas of law, this has been sustained, and I think that will be informative and perhaps decisive to the appellate courts as they look at the president's appeal.
Mr. Trump's sentencing, as you know, is going to take place on July 11th, next month. These are the lowest level nonviolent felonies. They are punishable by a fine, probation, or up to 4 years in prison. Donald Trump turned 78 this month. He's almost 80. He has no prior record. Here's what he said this morning in an interview with Fox on the topic of possible jail time.
The judge could decide to say, hey, house arrest or even jail.
It could.
How do you face what that could be?
I'm okay with it. I saw one of my lawyers the other day on television saying, oh, no, you don't want to do that to the president. I said, you don't beg for anything. I don't know that the public would stand it, I'm not sure the public would stand for it.
If you were still DA, would you recommend jail time?
Well, I'm not going to answer that question because that's really just for Mr. Bragg to decide. If you ask me, do I think the court will impose jail in this case? As I said to you, I think yesterday, I think not, but ultimately that's Judge Merchan's decision. The president has made this a little more complicated by having been found in contempt 10 times during the court. But I think that with the proximity of the Republican convention 4 days after his sentencing, and then if he is the candidate for the Republican Party, the proximity of the election, I would be surprised that he would be sentenced to any imprisonment.
What do you think going to jail would do for Donald Trump?
Now, that said, the court could adjourn sentencing until after the general election and then essentially decide then.
Let me ask you about one of the key criticisms here. Mr. Trump and his allies, they keep taking aim at Judge Juan Merchan. He did give $15 to the Biden campaign in 2020, gave an additional $20 to Democratic causes then. Even if he wasn't technically required to recuse himself, should Judge Merchan have recused himself just to avoid even the appearance of a conflict?
I really don't think a $20 donation and a $30 donation rise to the level of a serious appearance of a conflict. Obviously, Senator Cotton and others who are speaking for the president strongly disagree with that. I look at that both as de minimis, and secondly, that it has been reviewed by the courts in New York and determined not to be a grounds for recusal. I know Judge Merchan. Obviously, we were before Judge Merchan. He was our grand jury judge when we prosecuted the Trump Organization. And I think he is honest as the day is long. He was careful, he was caring, and I think he handled a very difficult trial with a neutral hand and gave the president every benefit of the doubt that he was entitled to under the law.
Then quickly to conclude, Donald Trump and his allies have branded this case a witch hunt. You've heard that in particular they have been critical of DA Alvin Bragg and a key member of his team who was hired directly from the Biden Justice Department. How do you respond to the criticism that this was a political prosecution?
Do you remember when Michael Cohen was indicted by U.S. Attorney Barrara in 2015? The president, incoming president, President Trump, asked Barrara to stay on, and that investigation continued. So President Trump fired Barrara, and he brought in a Republican U.S. Attorney, Jeff Berman, excellent man, great lawyer. Jeff Berman continued the investigation into the president, so the president fired him too. So this has really not been just, it's the Justice Department under a Democrat and this president investigated this president's conduct, and the president's response in most instances was to kill the case.
Cyrus Vance, we appreciate your joining us. Thanks for coming back to Meet the Press.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.